It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, there was a good bit of news yesterday. As you all know, Hunter Biden's plea deal looks like it's not going to make it through the justice system. And it's going to reset and possibly move into a trial. That's not good news for Joe Biden, but I think it's also an indicator that this Hunter Biden story is not going to go away and that it's going to have significant impact. And of course, Speaker McCarthy is testing out impeachment scenarios along with this. So I thought it would be a good time to get your thoughts.
Well, first of all, I'm not absolutely sure that the Hunter Biden deal won't go through. The judge gave them 30 days to see if they could work it out to satisfaction. And I don't know what the outcome will be of that, but I think there's a reasonable chance they'll come up with some sort of a deal. But the larger question is, I'm sure the Republicans are going to cling to the Hunter Biden story for dear life. I mean, it's their number one talking point. But when you think about it, what else do they have to run on? They didn't have a platform in 2020. Their leading candidate is a twice impeached, twice indicted former president who's likely to be indicted twice more in the next month or so, who has already been judged liable for sexual assault by a jury of his peers, who's running for president to stay out of jail, and who is using his campaign funds to pay his legal bills. I think the only substantive thing he said in this campaign was in December when he went on his own social media network, Truth Social, and said he wanted to terminate the Constitution. So, what else do they have to talk about? Look, I hold no brief for Hunter Biden. To me, he's a sad case. He's a tragic figure. But if he's found guilty of committing crimes like anybody else, including Trump, incidentally, he ought to be punished for those crimes. But unfortunately for the Republicans, Hunter Biden isn't the president. There's no credible evidence yet. Maybe they'll come up with it, but there's none yet that Joe Biden has done anything wrong. There have been a lot of wild accusations, but most of them were shot down not by the Biden Justice Department, but by the Trump Justice Department. So my advice to the Republicans is, if you're worried about corruption in government, maybe you ought to start by self-policing. Quit protecting Donald Trump and his efforts to undermine our democratic system. Use your majority of the House to come up with some ideas for actually solving problems and try to bring the country together, not divide. Craig and I have talked a lot about Kevin McCarthy, and I had pretty low expectation for him as Speaker. And he's making me feel like I was optimistic. Impeachment should not be a political tool that you use against your political adversaries. Look, we know that that nutcase Freedom Caucus in the House doesn't, I'd say, give a rat's patootie about, safeguarding democracy. It doesn't care about the institutions of democracy, which it should be protecting, or upholding the rule of law. But the Speaker of the House is the person third in line for the presidency. He should know better than that. But maybe that's a little too much to ask of Kevin McCarthy.
Greg, do you agree with your colleague, or do you feel like this could be a major strategic issue for Joe Biden?
I'm not sure that it has the legs that a lot of the Republicans hope it will, although they certainly seem intent upon pursuing it. I'd like to step back, though, and make a couple of points. First of all, in general, about the families of the individuals who hold public office. Al and I have both been around people who hold high public office. Their families, not like any other family in America, has children with varying degrees of issues, unhappily. I mean, some may avoid that, but many do not. Alcohol and drugs, even crime, engaging with unscrupulous people, unfortunately, befalls a lot of family members of high government officials, simply because they're not really used to dealing in the environment in which they find themselves, and so people seek them out for favors. I happily, I think you tended to get engaged when I was chief of staff to Vice President Bush with some of the kids, some of the other family members who would seek counsel when somebody came to talk to them. And it's not just your charm and genius when foreign governments approach you when you're related to the president of the United States. And you ought not to get involved in that, but it's not something that a non-political person really understands. So I've felt, and even the Trump said, their young son was out of bounds. We have a president who's considerably older than most, and so he has a son who's older than most. But to go to Hunter Biden for a minute, I mean, he is somebody, by his own acknowledgement, suffered seriously for several years, alcoholism and drug abuse. To continue to beat on that, I don't think changes those swing voters in the middle. It may make some conservatives feel good, although, by the way, I might ask them to hold themselves to the same standard, but it may make them feel good. But is it really going to move votes at the end of the day? Because what family hasn't been touched by someone they know, a friend, a family member who has struggled with drugs and alcohol? So I think there's probably more compassion in the country than they might think. Finally, I think the path to the settlement looked to me, and I'm not a lawyer, but to actually be kind of poorly handled by the lawyers. It was the judge who has to approve this. It was the one who recognized that there were provisions of the agreement that, in some cases, she didn't have jurisdiction over. In other cases, may not be constitutional. And as she probed it, it was Hunter Biden's own lawyers who said, wait a minute, that's not our understanding, sitting in court. Here's a startling statistic. I got curious, looked it up. In federal criminal court cases, today, according to the American Bar Association, federal criminal court cases, 98% of them are settled. In some places, they almost never actually go to a trial. So settlement is something that's quite acceptable. It's certainly something when an individual has been engaged in activities that are questionable, if not illegal, while in the midst of dealing with drugs and alcohol. So a settlement is not unusual. A judge has a perfect right to review the settlement, found issues. I do agree with Al. I think there's probably a good chance that both the government and the Hunter Biden's attorneys want this settled. They'll probably figure out a way to do it that'll satisfy the judge, and hopefully we go on our way. I also agree with Al. Just because you're a family member of somebody who holds high office doesn't mean you're exempt from the laws. And if you violate the laws, you should be prosecuted. But to make the public spectacle out of it that we've done, I just find abhorrent. And I don't think it's going to work for Speaker McCarthy to hint at maybe indictment, raise charges that have over and over again found to be untrue or unproven, or no supporting information about payments by foreign governments and that sort of thing to the Biden. So it just seems like a loser to me, and it seems to be a tragic situation for a member of the Biden family. And I hope it passes soon. I don't think any member of the family who's not really put themselves forward for public office needs to go through this kind of a public spectacle.
Al, using Craig's analogy, so This is not a Billy Carter or Roger Clinton situation, though, is it? I mean, there's some gravitas to all this, isn't there?
I'm not sure that it's remarkably different. I mean, look, I can't remember what Billy Carter was, but it seems to me there was some sort of payment involved with Billy Carter as well. The numbers weren't quite as great, but that was 40 years ago, and we've had a lot of inflation since then. And Roger was, I think, mostly a drug abuse deal, but so is Hunter Biden. I mean, look, if Hunter Biden took a bribe, well, first of all, he wasn't in public office. If I had a penny for every person in Washington that has used his position or his former position or his relationship with a politician to make money, I'd be rich. I wouldn't even have to do this show for the high pay that you give us. It's distasteful, but Craig and I probably have had dozens and dozens of colleagues that we've worked with who only real qualification to make money in Washington as lobbyists as they once worked for a politician. And everybody, that's one of the ways of Washington. It's one of the reasons people don't like it. That's why we call it the swamp. I mean, I guess I just don't think, unless there's a tie to the president, I don't think it's relevant for the political debate. And the Republicans can yell about it all they want. I mean, if they're worried about kids making money off their parents and really off the government, why don't they start with Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka and Jared Kushner, who have, I mean, as far as I can tell, certainly more has been documented about the way they've used their inside influence than Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden probably doesn't have the capacity to think of the ways they've used it. I might be dead wrong about this, and I know the Republicans are going to want to make this an issue, but I sort of agree with Craig. If they make this an issue, I think it's going to turn out to be absolutely counterproductive. And they're going to be doing this in the context of a year of trials of Donald Trump for actual criminal activity. Maybe they think that's the way out. I think maybe owning up to the fact that their own candidate is trying to undermine democracy, and that they actually, they claim to be the Freedom Caucus and so patriotic, and maybe they ought to just spend a little more time safeguarding the institutions of democracy.
Greg, you have the last word this week.
I don't know. I think I'd sum up by going to a place we've been before, and that's to ask the question, what's really on voters' minds when they think about going to vote for a candidate? And what's on their mind is which of the candidates understands the kinds of problems and issues they face. I think every day that Speaker McCarthy or Republicans, carry on about Hunter Biden, it's unfortunate for Hunter Biden that it's almost a waste of time if the key equation is, are they trying to project themselves as somebody who understands the problems and the issues of people in middle America or in the cities, and frankly, in the cities, or even across the country, opioid addiction and drug issues are really key concerns in community after community. So to attack somebody who's had to deal with that, it's counterproductive, and it makes, the trouble is that it makes news, and so it's this Pavlovian factor of, if they go talk about it, they'll be on cable news, and if they're on cable news, they figure that's better than not being on cable news. The key, the real key, and Al mentioned it, and I agree with it. The key is to have some kind of a platform and tell the American people what you stand for, what you do, if elected, and run on serious issues. We've got serious issues in the country, and let the Biden family, settle whatever issues they may have, outside of this political debate.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.